Vice President of Policy for C3 Solutions, and incredibly excited for today's discussion and privileged to be joined by three incredible panelists, all of whom have a great deal of experience and knowledge in the area of accelerating energy innovation to meet our future energy needs and environmental ambitions. This is always a timely topic because there's always something going on, but it feels especially timely given that we have rising energy demands. We have experts warning about facing some serious strains on the grid. There's growing power demands from AI, but also people see AI as a critical innovation that could help solve a lot of our energy and climate challenges, and hopefully some of those regulatory challenges as well. Of course, energy security is once again at the forefront of policy conversations, and necessarily so. And we also have relatively new laws and policies where federal agencies, namely the Department of Energy, but others as well, have significantly more resources for applied research and commercialization activities. And so today we are going to dive into the various stages of energy innovation, some of the key players and sectors, and really have a conversation about both the role of policy and I think importantly the role of the private sector. As we all know, energy innovation unfolds across various stages with many different players. Each have their own distinct advantages, their own opportunities, as well as their own challenges. And some of those challenges are faced across the innovation spectrum, from the initial innovation of an idea to the implementation and widespread adoption. And it's an issue that I think is from both sides of the political aisle. Policymakers have advocated for technological advancements and solutions and more energy innovation. But what that means in the policy world and what that means in practice can really mean different things to different people. And so in some senses, this conversation is meant to be intentionally broad and wide-reaching, but also meant to drill down on some specific policy challenges and opportunities. So with that being said, I want to bring our panelists into the conversation, and rather than read each of your bios, I was wondering, can you guys tell the audience a little more about yourself, your organization, and the role you play in the energy innovation pipeline? And I'll start with the way that it was introduced in the webinar. So Michael, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Dave, and then finish up with Rick.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Nick, and it's wonderful to be a part of this conversation. Certainly important to think about how we orient our institutions around some of the pressing national needs that are always evolving. So real quick background on me. My current job, I lead the venture portfolio that invests in energy and environmental technologies at Emerson Collective. We are a family office out in Palo Alto, California. We do a lot of different things, anywhere from education to immigration, media, arts and culture. But one thing that crosscuts it all is making sure that everyone has a healthy environment to live and thrive in. So we do both philanthropy policy as well as direct investments in technology innovators. So my North Star is to invest in consequential companies that are going to have generational scale impact and venture scale returns. And the way we think we're going to do that is by finding technologists that have come up with a way of unlocking a bottleneck, relieving a bottleneck to the energy transition. Because the energy transition is a very big opportunity, but there's a lot of friction in the system that keeps it held back. Some of that's policy induced, some of it's technology induced. My job's generally on the technology side. But in a prior life, I did have the honor of serving at the U.S. Department of Energy back in the Bush administration during that energy crisis. So I had a chance to be a policy entrepreneur back then, and was part of standing up ARPA-E, the Loan Programs Office, and passing the Energy Independence Security Act of 2007. So I've seen this problem from a few different perspectives and seen the cultural drivers shift over time.
Great, thank you for that. Dave?
Thanks for having me, Nick. My name is Dave Solen. I am currently an independent consultant working on energy innovation. I actually Work with another one of our panelists, Rick Stockberger at Bright Energy Innovators as an expert in residence. So I work with a lot of startups, but I also work with a lot of companies that are seeking to get government funding and trying to manage the funding complex that is the federal government in terms of energy innovation. So I advise a lot of companies who are trying to compete for solicitations. I've also served at the Department of Energy. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Renewable Power. I ran the policy office for a bit, and I was in the Office of Science for a year. And prior to that, I spent about 10 years as a contractor in energy R&D. At a joint appointment with the Idaho National Lab. I was on their board, and I contracted directly with DOE on solar projects, NSF on grid reliability and renewables integration, International Atomic Energy Agency, also a Bush alum for EPA in the R&D office. And I also served in the House of Representatives on a committee and was the legislative director. And my government contracting experience goes back to the late 90s. It's a long time ago, but that's how long I've been working with the government and being on either end of the contracting. So definitely very passionate about energy innovation and the Department of Energy in particular. I recently co-authored a DOE modernization report for ClearPath, specifically looking at policy recommendations and organizational recommendations to essentially modernize the department and accelerate energy innovation. So looking forward to this panel.
Great, thanks, Dave. Rick?
Yeah, I'm Rick Stockberger. I'm president and CEO of Bright Energy Innovators, and I might be the only one that hasn't worked at DOE on this panel. I'm not sure, Nick. Are you?
I haven't either. No.
Okay, all right.
Stayed away from government.
I hear that. Well, I've been very fortunate to surround myself with people that are a lot smarter than me, and this panel is certainly a testament to that. At Bright, we're an innovation-first ecosystem advancing the transition to a clean energy economy. We're really focused heavily in the Midwest and Appalachia, mostly around the idea that most of the technologies that are coming out are hard tech. There's a lot of physical products that need to be built for this clean energy revolution. And I'm a son of the Rust Belt. My dad lost his job at a steel mill in the early to mid 90s. And I see an opportunity with the clean energy transition that the free market can really build back the manufacturing prowess of the Midwest in a very strong and meaningful way. And so right now we serve over 100 companies across the Midwest, mostly focused in Ohio, and help them really go further faster. This climate crisis is very, very real, but I fully believe that innovation is what is going to solve that problem of climate, and we're able to also rebuild the American economy in the Midwest. So that's why we're here, and really excited to be able to support those companies and get those products to market, so I can hopefully be a good ancestor, not just to my kids, but to my grandkids and my great-grandkids.
Yeah, that's great, Rick. Thank you. And as you can hear, we have a lot of knowledge, a lot of institutional knowledge, both of the Department of Energy, but in terms of collaboration with the private sector here. And I want to start with some of the policy questions and just dive right into those, because there's been a role for the Department of Energy in de-risking technology in commercialization, but it's certainly been plussed up in recent years. But there are some programs like the Small Business Technology Transfer and like Small Business Innovation Research that have been around for decades, I think over 50 years now. And so how do you guys look at what the Department of Energy is doing, or what the federal government is doing kind of writ large on early stage innovation, and track that both from maximizing the efficiency of what the agencies are doing, but also in your roles as kind of private sector investment or private sector kind of incubation between the federal government and some of these startups. So any of you can take it. I'd love to hear from all of you on the question, though. Maybe I can
jump right.
Yeah, maybe I can start with Michael. I'll assign next time.
All right, I'll jump right in there. Yeah, so the way that a lot of our companies have engaged with DOE is often in the before we get involved phase. So it is in the development of the technology, taking it from a lab bench, building a product around it, showing that there's some potential for market adoption. Typically, we invest after you've got the semblance of a team put together, you're already a company. And so SBIR, and I would say more often than not, programs like Cyclotron Road or some of the incubators have been stood up alongside of the national laboratories are really our primary pipeline of investment opportunities. After we've invested, there's definitely opportunities to continue to collaborate either with the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations that a number of our companies are, I would call, guinea pigs right now to see how that experiment will go, or with the Loan Programs Office. I do think it's important, though, to give the proviso that I always tell our companies that you should view a DOE grant as an upside accelerant and not as your base case. Because DOE funding opportunities are kind of idiosyncratic when they're available, and you don't drive the timeline. So given that it's important for companies to master the timeline and be in charge of their own destiny, it's important that they've got a plan that they're pursuing predominantly that doesn't rely on DOE funding. One other thing I think is really important about the DOE R&D budget, though, is just creating a general talent base and kind of churn of scientific discovery, because you never know kind of when or where good ideas are going to come from. And so DOE's longstanding effort of funding research at universities and national laboratories is really a key part of the energy and innovation ecosystem in the United States.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one of the examples that folks often point to that spawned out of research and it came from DoD was the internet or even GPS. And it's not as if the Department of Defense intended to make GPS so we could get from our house to the closest Chipotle faster. They did it for defense purposes. And so I think that is ultimately what we want to replicate as much as possible, is that there is a lot of innovation and discovery and basic R&D across the federal research institutions and across academia. And how can we push some of that out into the market if there are good ideas? And certainly how can we pull the market in to better understand what those research institutions are doing?
Yeah, and one thing I did want to put a point on that was in David's recommendations is the importance of having a small, flexible bucket to meet great ideas when they happen to appear. There's kind of no way to really know when you're going to come upon something that you think really stands out from the crowd. When you're in government, you have the privilege of being everyone's collaborator, nobody's competitor, and so you get great information insight. But one of our frustrations was we had to then go to Congress and get an appropriation, and that took a long time, and then run an RFP. And so we're like, hey, great idea, we'll get you money in 3 years. And so being able to meet the moment is really important as we think about how to support and sustain American innovation energy.
Yeah, without a doubt on that. And Nick, I'm glad you brought up DoD as well, because as an organization, we've had a lot of success with DoD. And then since we've been able to bring Dave on a couple of years ago, even more success with DOE. I think there's a very clear difference though between the two, because DoD is trying to be your customer, right? Like they want to buy your product and utilize it for defense purposes, whereas DOE doesn't have that. DOE is not going to be your customer. GSA might be your customer down the road or otherwise, but so it's a very different kind of pathway of thinking from that mindset. So I really like what you said, Michael, around that can't be your primary customer, because it legitimately isn't actually a customer. At the end of the day, they are trying to enable the market to be your customer in many ways, and what that looks like. And so I think as we think about the funding that's come down, obviously, or not obviously, we're very focused in the seed and Series A rounds of those early stage companies. And, to be frank, the OSED money and most of that's coming out is for extremely large companies. We're very blessed to have Ultium Cells down the road here that got $1 billion from the Loan Program Office. And they've done all their training in our facility here at Bright, and that's amazing. Or so it's $1 billion companies down the road, or it's that really early stage SBIR, there's still a huge gap in the middle of where we look at those, $1 to $10 million projects that could help us scale to demonstration and help create a pipeline to demonstration. And if we were really able to get kind of the market involved in that, and then understand kind of those mechanisms that we can pull, like that's a really, really important space that I think DOE can meaningfully pull or fulfill in the future.
That's great. And Dave, before you jump in, Rick, could you take a few minutes and just describe kind of what that training looks like at an incubator space for those who might not be familiar with kind of what an incubator actually does?
Yeah, I mean, I'll explain it like this. So it's actually on the workforce development side of our organization, but we're in Warren, Ohio, over here, Courthouse Square, beautiful view, an old, we were the capital of the Connecticut Western Reserve. That's how old this city is, and it's amazing from that standpoint. Very Rust Belt city. We've lost, a lot of jobs, a lot of disinvestment from that standpoint. But as an incubator, our startup programs are focused on that seed and Series A and what that looks like. But we have a huge community need in the workforce space. And so when Altium Cells landed here, as well as Foxconn, who's been manufacturing electric vehicles in the old Lordstown Motors plant, we saw a need that there wasn't anybody that understood what battery technology was in our community. They were manufacturing cars for a very long time. And so the story I'll very quickly tell is actually one of my best days at work. We partner with Second Baptist Church, which is the oldest African-American church in our community, bring their kids from the youth group in. We have a little battery R&D area that we test electric vehicle batteries and other things like that. But we're teaching them how to, those basics of batteries, right? On the other side of the wall, we had about 80 Altium employees that did their first week of work at our facility. So all 1,300 of their employees came through our facility to have a 1-week crash course on Battery 101. And so we were able to help them because they hadn't worked in this space before, and they're setting up this entire new market, right? Like in America, we haven't built electric vehicle batteries ever. And we have built batteries in general, but that's just not a huge market at this point. And so it's growing rapidly. But the best day of work ever was one of those kids was in our lab, and he was waving to a person on the other side, and it just ended up being his dad. And his dad hadn't had a job in 5 years and was unemployed when the Lordstown motor plant shut down when they were building GM's vehicles out of there. And to see that kid connect and go, I can grow up and do something that my dad is doing, is something that I lost when I was a teenager, when my dad lost his job in steel and I didn't have an opportunity to do what my dad does. So these jobs are really creating meaningful pathways for people to want us to be able to stay around and be able to grow in their communities. And so as an incubator, yeah, we're focused on those really future facing technologies and all of that, but like creating economic impact in our own community is a huge opportunity. And the Mahoning Valley, or as I affectionately like to call it, the Voltage Valley, we're all about that impact.
No, it's a great story and very well said. Dave, how about you? I know you've spent, like you said, time thinking about what DOE is doing now. Can you give us a little bit of an overview as to what your report for ClearPath suggests the Department of Energy do, especially given the sizing up of its applied research and commercialization activities?
Thanks, Nick. One thing that we tried to do with the report was to have less than 10 recommendations. So we wanted it to be easily understandable and something that could be implemented and achieved. I wanted to concentrate on a couple of those, specifically bearing in mind the point that Michael brought up, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Something that everyone needs to understand about the Department of Energy when it comes to energy R&D and demonstration as well, demonstration deployment, is that the department is really a giant portfolio manager and pass-through entity. Industry carries out the work, national labs or universities. It's not DOE itself. Really, you're a program manager, portfolio manager. So what you want to have is a comprehensive set of tools and mechanisms that you can use. And traditionally, DOE has been much more focused on extremely early stage research and fundamental research, and only providing money for the most part to universities and national labs. Whereas, beginning with the Energy Act of 2020, DOE has become more of a commercialization and demonstration deployment entity, which it was not used to. So the kind of the middle of the technologies, kind of the valley of death or whatever you want to call it, the mid-range technology readiness levels, DOE doesn't have a great area of tools for that. There is ARPA-E, but it's very focused on certain themes. But one of the things we tried to do in the report was emphasize that there needs to be funding mechanisms where early success, early advancement, so that you're not waiting 3 years, so that if you have really good results in 6 months, that you get another infusion of funding with pretty specific rapid prototyping or sprint goals, so that you could really push technologies along that are having a pretty big impact. So that's really important. Other areas, especially Michael mentioned the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations. There's these giant demonstrations. There's more than 20 that are going to be funded in all different types of technologies. But when you get into these large scale demonstrations, you're going to have to get the permits to actually deploy the technologies. And it's really important that the federal government, particularly DOE, but also the interagency, because permits come from a variety of sources, that there is expedited permitting reform, maybe more categorical exclusions, but basically really pushing hard to get projects and technologies deployed and permitted and deployed. Because traditionally what happens is, there's a lot of NIMBYism, there's a lot of fingers in the pie. It takes pretty long, but when it comes to the private sector, time is money. So you really want to get those projects moving forward. And on the other side, when you compete for funds and go after funds, say it's SBIRs or even larger awards, you definitely want to have DOE get better at moving selections to awards. And what that means is, you find out you win an award, you could be in negotiations for 6 or 12 months if it's larger than a couple $100,000. And that really shouldn't be happening. DOE needs to take a look at, how do you get to award quickly? How do you protect American companies' IP and make it friendly to the companies? Because anecdotally, but it comes up an awful lot right now, is DOE is a lot more money. There's a lot more companies getting excited and being selected, and they're finding out that the department can be kind of tough when it comes to negotiating IP. And the department doesn't have direction to, hey, let's get these out. Let's be friendlier to the companies so that they can get working and manufacture things, get them out to the market. So that's something that really needs to be looked at as well. So really, you want to be helping the private sector, getting money to keeping solicitations less complex, making sure that the money gets where the impact's going to happen more quickly, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it also ladders up, though, to what the policy objectives are. When DOE was stood up, it was largely around creating domestic energy supplies, taking advantage of our own resources. The challenge now is energy security, decarbonization, and economic development. And so time is money when you're talking about economic development and energy security in a way that it may not has been as important in the past. I'll freelance a little bit here if you don't mind, Nick, but recently I've been kind of increasingly concerned, if you look at the trajectory of deep tech investment in the United States and the returns over the last couple of decades. We've been doing some backward-looking analysis, and one big challenge is China has effectively been capping the returns of the winners. And if we continue to have that, it's very difficult to get the venture math to work and continue to have capital formation from institutions to allocate capital to innovation, to deep tech, to the things that are going to be important for solving climate change. So it's important that the U.S. government works in collaboration with what is really the United States competitive advantage of our private sector to get these innovations into the market and capitalize on the opportunity. Because China developed a playbook with PV that they now own 97% of the global wafering supply chain. We don't want to see that happen in other markets, but it's happening in EVs right now. And we either need to like wake up or we're going to find that our, we're not going to have any breakfast to eat in these markets in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, let's stay on that for a little bit. And this is to Michael first, but you other guys weigh in too. What do we do about that? I mean, I think it seems as a part of the challenge is that it's really difficult to build and make things here. I think there's also skepticism that we can't, beat China by becoming more like China and ensuring that the government is the end all be all when it comes to picking what technologies should move forward and making sure they're kind of endlessly dependent on federal funding streams. So I'm curious as to, I think the wake-up call is very necessary and very real. I'm curious as to what you guys see as the biggest policy challenges and policy solutions there. Maybe not just policy solutions, but also private sector solutions.
I think it depends on which levers you want to try and pull on. I think if you're trying to go for the easy button, from a policy elegance solution, but very difficult from a practicality and a political solution, is you get WTO to do its job. We let China into the global trading order on the assumption that we had a policeman who was going to police the way that they engaged and interacted, and they just haven't. They just quite haven't. And so the United States had to wake up and realize that what can we do unilaterally to level the playing field? And that's a big part of the political economy behind passing the Inflation Reduction Act. So I agree. We don't want to just try and replicate their playbook. We want to try and figure out where are our unique strengths and play to those. And I think there's a lot of different ways to think about it. But certainly trade policy, if you're not talking about that, you're probably missing the heart of each.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it seems as if even just the WTO's, slow ruling process is problematic, and at the time they do actually decide something, the lunch is already eaten and the repercussions are already had. So I think that's a good point. How about you guys, Rick and Dave? How do you guys see this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. I mean, it seems like most times that we interact on the international scale, our investment certainly outweighs our return on those kind of international organizations. From that standpoint, I think that's the most politically correct way to say that. Another obvious issue that we have competing in this space is China's just outspending us, partially frankly with our own loan money. And so, when it comes to that, like being able to outspend China is just not something that I think the United States is capable of with, our debt and what that looks like. And so, honestly, I think the solutions go back to the solutions that, Americans have always undertaken, which is innovation. Like, that's why I am so profoundly committed to the space that I am, is because I still believe that American innovation, when properly motivated, can beat anybody in the world. And we, did that historically as a country for a very, very long time. And so putting innovation as close to manufacturing as we possibly can, I think is really, really important. And identifying what those big issues are. Like, Nick, you started out saying, with the what's coming on with the grid and the space there, like if we take any sort of political approach to solving the grid issue, it's not going to work. Like, we say, hey, we have to go all solar now, all solar and wind, all renewables. Like, we have to do that. Like, it's not going to be enough. We can't deploy fast enough. On the other end, if we say, hey, we're going to fire up coal plants and natural gas plants, we also can't do that fast enough. And so we all have to really come together and like weigh, what the reality is of the economics of the situation, and how we also make sure that we're mitigating climate change at the right time and competing with China. So, it's not easy. And I don't think anything worthwhile is. So, I'm excited for those opportunities and how we can overcome that together as a country. And hopefully that this is the big thing that we start focusing on in the national narrative around, the economy and how we can beat China and how we can utilize the American Midwest and American innovation to do that.
I would say one thing that DOE could just really do better, and we suggested this in our report, is it really needs to protect American IP and to also enforce the rules for it. Usually when there's a breakdown, I mean, China that does do espionage, but they also walk through the front door and get granted the money or take the IP, even though there's controls and procedures in place that should be utilized in order for that not to happen. So DOE could definitely do a better job of that. You want to make sure that American IP stays American. With that said, there are levers that DOE can use to make sure that it is enforced. The Bayh-Dole Act says if you take federal government funding, then you agree to substantially manufacture that in the United States. And this is something that DOE could definitely do a better job with. There's not many actions that take place for that, and it's awfully clear that there is American IP that is being used to manufacture stuff overseas. So that's another area, obviously bringing up Michael's point. The whole point is if the WTO is not going to be the policeman, then justice is just us. So then you have to take a look at how do you protect the American IP when you're doing that. I would also say though too is really need to out-innovate China. I mean, that is where our advantage lies. We have the best research institutions in the world here. There's a lot more money across the federal government to work on all kinds of technologies, whether it's AI, quantum computing, decarbonization, whatever it is. The funds are there. We need to execute on it. So we need to out-innovate them. I would also bring up too, and I was encouraged to see the Loan Programs Office recently made a conditional commitment to mine more lithium. This is something that's really important because over the years, a lot of the attention has been on, the outputs at the end of something where it's actually the retail product or the wholesale product, and we're not looking out for the supply chain. And we essentially gave up for a number of years in terms of mining critical minerals and rare earths, making sure there's other parts of the supply chain so that things can be manufactured in the US, that we're not just importing a whole bunch of different components and then assembling them at the end or just importing them wholesale. So it was really good news to see LPO is doing that. Their DOE does have a lot of these levers to improve upon that throughout the supply chain. So that's something that I see as encouraging and also really important when it comes to American national security and economic security.
Yeah, I'll just jump on that with a quick anecdote. One of our companies is in lithium, got a DOE grant, and learned a few months ago that they were going to need to go through a full EIS before accessing their grant. It was estimated to take 3 to 5 years, but these were appropriations that went away in 2026. So they ended up with a null set where it's like, we just can't access the funds. And that just shouldn't be an acceptable outcome to anybody.
Yeah, and I think you guys all hit on this in certain aspects, but I think the bureaucracy of trying to, one, utilize these funds, but then also just to permit projects has been more and more difficult, whether it's just through longer and longer EISs or just lawsuits and judicial activism that seems to stop anything in its tracks. So I think the permitting challenges, which again has garnered some bipartisan interest in solving these complexities, has been encouraging, but there hasn't been really anything that's made it to the president's desk that he would be even willing to sign. And so, Michael, kind of continuing along that, how does some of those regulatory challenges, whether it's permitting, through a National Environmental Policy Act or even just through state regulations, impact how your companies choose where and what to build? And then kind of for Rick and Dave, you guys touched on this a little bit, but how do you navigate some of the bureaucracies at the Department of Energy and all of the laws and strings attached that make it really difficult to use some of this money. Some of it may be necessary, certainly, because we're talking about taxpayer dollars here, but also it really reduces flexibility. It results in a lot of inefficiencies. And kind of as an incubator, and I'm thinking in the policy space, how do you guys approach that? So two separate questions around bureaucracy, but Michael, I'll throw it to you first and then let Dave and Rick take it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different considerations when you're citing a project or a manufacturing facility. Regulation is definitely one of the key ones. It's part of the formula for consideration. And sometimes, honestly, it's a binary consideration where there's times that we'll just say we're not going there because we have no idea how long it'll take us to get the permits. And we look for easier places to do business. But other considerations are the depth of the workforce that's there, because often these are skilled jobs and you need to make sure that you can staff them in a timely manner. Energy costs is another huge thing. I currently live out in California, but I can safely say we are not building many big manufacturing facilities in my portfolio in California as energy prices have gotten
You can send them
increasingly expensive. So I'm pointing them there. So we'll follow up and see if there's more opportunities.
Yeah.
The other side is, state level incentives. A lot of states do a great job of trying to attract the next generation of jobs. Sometimes it gets a little bit overzealous in competing with other states. I know I've seen in my home state of Kansas, often companies will move from Kansas to Missouri and then back again, playing the states off each other. So you don't want to see that happen. But I would say that the local permitting, siting, and then kind of downstream effects on how that affects workforce and energy prices certainly are key drivers in where we site our facilities.
Great, thanks. Rick and Dave, how do you guys think about how companies navigate the bureaucracy within the Department of Energy, whether it's trying to work with a SBIR office or whether, in some of these newer programs, how are those challenges remedied? What do you guys see as some of those bigger obstacles? And are some of the solutions, can they be fixed by DOE themselves, or are there policy changes that need to be happen through an act of Congress that you would like to see change for some of these things?
Well, I spend a lot of time praying that Dave Solen doesn't raise his rate. No, we're very fortunate. I rely on Dave a lot for his insight into the space, and our companies do too. That's for us, been unbelievably important. I do think, I obviously see the same thing. So a lot of our companies that are going to, Series A and starting their B rounds, are having the same problems that Michael's pointing to. I do want to do a quick shout out from an economic development standpoint. This state here does it right, and I just mean that from Jobs Ohio created their economic development organization based on a liquor tax, and so COVID made the state of Ohio have a lot of funds being able to draw companies here in a meaningful way, and has been super beneficial to that point. Navigating whether or not one part of the government is going to tell you this is a good idea and give you funding, and another part of the government is going to say, but it's going to take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years for us to actually let you do that. It is certainly something we come across regularly, and it's interesting because there's parts of the government that you wish would communicate better and more effectively and more efficiently, and I think I consistently say DOD and DOE need to really start locking at the hip on a couple of their projects. There's actually more, until recently, obviously, there's more funding from DOD for energy products than there was from DOE before IRA and BIL. So, I think that's something too that is very important aspect to be able to think about and talk about. And then Americanizing and friend shoring, partnerships in a meaningful way is also super important. So, how do we, whether it's graphite mining, right? There's a huge opportunity in Alaska right now that's just taking forever. When literally the market's just please, 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 please. There's nothing that we need more than more graphite, at this point in time. And we have an opportunity to do it in the United States and create jobs and do that in a meaningful way. And we're we're in our own way of getting that done, being able to manufacture it in North America and get it through those processes. So companies like Altium can have the graphite that they need to create the electric vehicles that are moving forward. So that's a quick roundabout answer to that.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Dave, what do you see?
Well, having been an insider, it's nice to be able to help companies understand and what DOE may fund, what they might not fund, who you need to talk to, that kind of thing. But frankly, not everyone could afford a consultant. I mean, this is why I really enjoy working with the startups, because they would, if I didn't work through Bright, they would never be able to hire a consultant themselves to do that. And now is a great time to be a consultant. And the reason why I say that is because things are becoming more complex, not less, and they don't really need to be. So in the report that we recently did, we suggested a reorganization for the department along the lines of energy applications. So when DOE started, it was out of the Arab oil embargo and the energy crisis of the 70s, and largely their offices still look that way. There's a nuclear office, there's a renewables office, so there's a fossil office. And a lot of the time,
including their furniture, looks like it's out of the 70s.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
that building.
And they're butting heads. So we suggested unifying offices and having power generation and the grid under one assistant secretary. Same thing with the industrial energy and transportation. And part of the reason why we did that was because if you talk to companies, they say, I don't understand when I come to DC, why do I have to talk to 4 different assistant secretaries and 2 undersecretaries when I'm a renewable energy developer? That's what I do. I do power generation. And we do some natural gas too. So I don't understand why I'm seeing all these people. And it's because that's the way it was organized. That said, there's a lot that DOE can do without legislation. One of the reasons why it's getting more complex is that DOE's operating, they're kind of drowning under a sea of good intentions. The reason why funding opportunity announcements have become so larded up and so large over the years, are about double what they were only 10 years ago, isn't because necessarily because of the statutory requirements. It's because people at DOE just keep adding things. And I will say, federal employees will faithfully execute on what they are directed and told to do. And under this administration, Justice 40, which says 40% of the benefits of any energy project funded by the federal government should go to the communities, not 40% of the money, but 40% of the benefits. And DOE has added these sections that are anywhere from 15, 20% of the evaluation. And they go all the way from the giant demo projects in loan programs office, all the way down to SBIRs, where now they have to write their own, what's called a peer plan. And the fact of the matter is, when you work with industry on the outside, the first time I talked to a company about how they should approach this, because it's a new requirement, was somebody asked me, how many basis points is that going to cost me? This is the cost of doing business. Like, we do renewable projects all over. We know what we're doing. Why are they putting this on us when we work with communities all the time? And that company has a lot of wherewithal. They could actually handle these, but time is money. It is a cost of doing business for them. And the other part is, not every company has a team of proposal writers and regulatory lawyers and everybody else to help out with this. If you're a startup or a young company, you don't have all this infrastructure internally. And the answer is not to have DOE or the federal government give more money to third parties to then help you. The answer is to make it less onerous on you, so that you have more competitors. That should be the way that it should be. And it's not because community benefits are important. Definitely community buy-in is important. If you put something infrastructure-wise, you will be hiring, you will be doing workforce development. I mean, the industry wants to be a good neighbor. Good neighbors are more successful than companies that come in and just try to like Bigfoot a project on a local community. But the fact of the matter is, we shouldn't be telling industry how to do it. Otherwise, it just gets too prescriptive. And DOE should actually take a look at, and how can they lessen requirements by 20-25%? They'll get a lot more diversity in terms of the types of applicants and the maturity of the companies. But anything to do with technology always started small, and it's important to remember that. So these are a couple of ways to look at it. Also, DOE, one of the things that we've noticed in terms of the loan programs office is definitely an important tool for advancing energy innovation. But because of the interest that has come, there is so much interest. And I would say that if anything, the loan programs office has erred on the side of saying, we could handle that. We could do these complex applications. And because of the throughput, there's a congestion point right now where they have so many applications that are more complex than they've seen in the past that they actually can't get through them quickly enough. And I think it's in part because there's such a wide aperture of the types of applications that they could get now that it's actually interfering a little bit. So that's a tough question right there. That's more of a managerial type thing, but there's definitely things across the board that DOE can do to help expedite innovation and how they are administrating, really. And I think that a lot of that needs to come from the top. As I said before, with Justice 40 community benefits, that's come from the White House and through the Secretary, and DOE is acting on it. If making things simpler and also concentrating on permitting and getting things through more quickly while, being within the appropriate guardrails, if that came from the top, federal employees would faithfully execute on that. And I think that's something that can be addressed without legislation.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And just as a heads up for those tuning in, we are taking audience questions. So if you have a question, feel free to submit it in the chat. I do want to stay on that a little bit, and maybe this is a bit of a spicy topic, but November is rapidly approaching, so you can feel free to abstain from this question if you want to. But thinking through either a continuation of a Biden administration or a change in administrations, how do the companies and businesses you work for and represent think about potential policy changes, potential regulatory changes, and the uncertainties that come with it? Particularly as we have this huge swath of money coming into the Department of Energy, but also possibilities to streamline some of these things too. So are they thinking about that? Is it a little too early to be thinking about that, or are they always thinking about that? How do you guys see what's happening in an election cycle?
Yeah, I'll start very quickly just around it. I think the most important thing that I can say to this particular topic is that the most important thing for businesses is consistency and knowing that they're making investments that are going to be the same investments and be playing by the same rules that they are playing by when they made the investments is unbelievably important. And so, I think for me, I just want to start out with saying that, like, administration change, no administration change, like, we need the rules that are in place right now and specific in the funding that's in place now that people are making investments around to stay where it's at. Whether or not we need to add more new funding or what that looks like and reassociate some of that funding is certainly a topic for discussion. But I think it's really, really important, as a person who ran a business and helps 100+ businesses right now, the idea that the rules could change is not good. And that's honestly why you see like more stable economies when there's a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, and there's it's because they're not going to be able to make too many changes which could negatively affect the business environment. And so that's probably as specific as I want to get
Sure.
around any of that as the CEO of a 501c3 nonprofit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump out here because one of the reasons why ClearPath and why we did this report was to get the attention of a potential Republican administration that energy innovation is still really important. With all the resources that DOE has, it's really important that progress be made. and that investment goes to the right places, and that there's impact, because it is important to the United States to be the world leader in energy and the world leader in physical sciences. DOE is actually the biggest funder of the physical sciences in the United States, which not many people know. It also has a crucial national security role. So that was in part why we wrote this report. But I would say, we briefed so many institutions and talked to so many people that think that for the most part, I don't think the Biden administration would necessarily follow all of them, because they just did their own realignment / reorganization. But I think that these things, while they might be targeted at a more conservative audience, it's actually gotten energy innovation is just it's not partisan. So this is something that can be adopted by any administration, but I think it also resonates a little better right now as well, because of the Protecting American IP and tying performance to American economic competitiveness is really important. So that's in part why we did the report. But I would also say, in answer to your question, Nick, are companies thinking about it? Always. Because they want to know what could change, what could not change with an administration. I would say, if there is a change in administration, that the loan programs office itself, I think it would be more active than it was under first Trump administration. But it might be, more concentrated at looking at things like the nuclear sector, maybe critical minerals, more utility scale storage than EV type storage. There's still a lot of innovation that could be done. They might concentrate on those sectors a little bit more. Outside of the actual funding, I think companies are probably most worried about the Inflation Reduction Act when it comes to the actual tax credits, because a lot of those are enormously complex and have these multipliers and adders and all types of things, and domestic sourcing requirements, where the present administration hasn't necessarily gotten those all the way through rules and Treasury and everything else, or there might be some pushback on that. So I think that companies are more worried from that aspect than they are, say, from funding energy innovation aspect. But the proof will be in the pudding. Obviously, no one really knows what's going to happen in November. So it's great that we're having these conversations.
Yeah, I'll just give a quick update. Sitting in the boardroom of some of these companies, the general operating assumption is that Trump will win, largely because that's probably on balance worse for the companies on a go-forward basis, to try and understand what could happen if that occurs. There's definitely analysis being done on the Inflation Reduction Act and kind of where are the soft spots politically, where there might be some pullback to declare some amount of political victory on that. I would also say, though, that part of the conversation is that right now Biden, in order to put together his political coalition, has effectively promised organized labor that he'll get a part of all of the grants that go out the door from now until the election. So even if you're already awarded a grant during the negotiation, that's getting inserted later. And so kind of back to David's part on providing clarity and transparency and removing friction, that's going in the opposite direction. I understand the political rationale, but if energy innovation is the objective, that's not aiding that agenda.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I feel like it's what Ezra Klein, when he talked about everything bagel liberalism, and just trying to attach so many different objectives to a singular thing, where it should be potentially about energy abundance or energy innovation or even climate mitigation, but strapping all of these other strings attached to them ultimately detracts from the objective you're trying to achieve. We had one question.
That's a great point, Nick.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I put this out there, especially demonstrations of what Michael just said and what you just said. Technology innovation is hard. It is really hard. We shouldn't assume that it's just going to happen. So we shouldn't put up barriers to it.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a question come in. It's a little more philosophical, so I'll let each of you take a bite at the apple. And it's kind of around this idea of the valley of death that we hear about, the commercial valley of death. And when thinking about energy markets, these are multi-trillion-dollar markets for the transportation fuels and transportation sector, but also for electricity supplies. And so some see this as a commercial valley of wealth. And so kind of in your eyes, where do you see kind of the federal government's role in bridging this valley of death, and do you think it's gone too far? And do you think it should be more of a private sector role in bridging this valley, or do you see, given some of these challenges, especially of building big infrastructure, the role of a Department of Energy? Whoever wants to take a stab at that, I know we're running short on time, but feel free to take a whack at it.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. To call it a unified valley of death, I think is not being intellectually fair to what the challenge actually is. There's multiple, I call them baton handoffs, where you go from kind of like needing one skill set as the key driver to kind of earning the right to play in the next chapter. But then you need a new skill set, you need a new network, you need a new form of capital as you go. And each of those handoffs take a while to cultivate. There is one key area that I think the government can be very helpful in, though, and it is that translational layer from needing technology capital to project capital. That is a challenge that there's not a lot of great private sector solutions to, because the key risk is, will the technology work at scale? And a startup actually can't stand behind that promise very well, because by design, they're thinly capitalized. And so the project capital who wants to put that risk on the technology provider looks at it and says, you're not investment grade, you don't have the credit. So having the government stand in there and say, it's important that we get this project done, will help underwrite the technology risk, I do think is in the national interest.
Yeah. How about you, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, so I fully agree around that, and being able to provide kind of non-dilutive capital alongside venture for key technologies that have like very well driven and understandable market need, that market isn't just being propped up by tax incentives or other items like that, I think is a really, really important role to play. And so I would like, for me, seeing DOE interact a lot more meaningfully with the market, and specifically with corporate and startup entities. By charter, I don't think DOE can do that. So I do want to give a shout out to Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation, FESI, and what that could potentially be, I think, is an unbelievably important mechanism that can help kind of bridge the gap in a more meaningful way between government and the corporate entities and venture. Because I think that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, to quote something from Akron, Ohio, from that standpoint. But like, I think there's huge opportunity there, and that's a spot that we can really meet that market gap, where we're seeing kind of the early stage stuff, and then it becomes venturable. But like in the hard tech space, Michael, I'm sure you can attest to, like, it's hard to invest in hard tech, but hard tech is really a lot of the solution that is going to get us there, because you're not going to get the massive returns on manufacturing a physical product. And obviously it's very software enabled. But so for my sense, and like from where Bright is working from, is those hard technologies that are going to create good paying jobs in those Justice 40 communities, and the Midwest and across the country is a really, really important place to play. And I think FESI specifically can play a great role in that. And my thoughts around that have been really helped formed by, frankly, C3 and Bipartisan Policy Center. So.
Wonderful. Dave, do you want the last word?
Sure. I would say, though, it's not just a philosophical question. The Energy Act of 2020 and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law have essentially provided the Department of Energy with about 25 new authorities that it did not have before, to be operating in spaces and with demonstration projects, and working with the Department of Defense and long duration energy storage, all these different things. It's already in law, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which was bipartisan, as was the Energy Act of 2020, and Bill actually funded those new authorities. And on top of that, between that and the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of this was forward appropriated through 2026. So at least for the bill stuff. And much of the IRA doesn't expire until 2031 and to 2031. So the fact of the matter is, DOE needs to be provided the tools to execute and the management to execute on it. So it's really important from an energy innovation perspective that, you know, these things are pushed forward and we do everything that we can to help make them a success. That said, a lot of this stuff would be classified, you know, writ large as industrial policy. It is something, especially DOE has not done well in the past when it comes to demonstration projects, which is why there is so much focus and needs to be so much focus on the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations and the Loan Programs Office and elsewhere to make sure that DOE is doing everything that it can to make sure that the projects have the best chance of success.
Yeah, great point, Dave. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. We're at the hour, so I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially thanks to our panelists, not just for today's discussion, but for carrying the baton forward on energy innovation. I think the three really just instrumental people and organizations that help solve and work on a lot of complex, challenging issues. So really appreciate your thoughts and insights today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Anytime.
Appreciate it,
Thanks,
Phil.
Nick.
Yep. Thanks.